And thank you, Jalapa, for putting on a great conference so far. I also want to thank James Corkery and Neha Saxena for putting the concept of this panel and getting all of us together. And I also want to thank the last few folks who were here for the last session for this conference today. Just real quick on me, I'm with the Federal Reserve Board working in operational risk. One side of my group does direct supervision on third-party service providers. The other side of my group works on the supervision on the bank side of operational risk. I'm also involved in incident response at the Federal Reserve, not for the Federal Reserve, the central bank, but as the Federal Reserve for supervision of financial institutions. So our topic is on cloud, specifically on cloud security. Kind of goes along with maybe some of the darker topics that we had earlier today. You know, cloud is obviously, as we all know, has been very important, both in the public sector and the private sector through use by both sides. And so I think this is a great topic for today. So I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves, and then we will start off with a couple of questions and give everybody a chance to chime in if they would like. Ron, you want to start?
Yeah. So I'm Ron Green. I'm the Chief Security Officer of Mastercard. I'm the former chair of the Financial Service Sector Coordination Council, and we've worked very closely with our big partners over the years, and we continue to do so. But I'm happy to be here.
Manish, Nagar, I am the Chief Security Officer for Vanguard. And at Vanguard, we manage about $8 trillion in client assets, and very happy to be there on this panel, especially considering the fact that we are in the middle of our cloud journey.
Hey, folks, and I'm Kelly Bissell. We have a little cloud product called Azure. And so I'm excited about being here and just really sharing and learning from Ron and Manish and Ray about how we can actually work better together around this securing the cloud.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. So let's start off with our first question. Maybe Ron's closest to me, and I'll ask him to start off. Is it easier to secure operations in the cloud versus on-prem? What are the common misconceptions or myths about cloud security that should be debunked?
Yeah, it starts with, and I think everyone, hey, if I'm going to do this thing in the cloud, it's going to be easy. All I got to do is just go there and everything. I'm sorry, that's my fault. Yeah. So the question was, is it easier to go to the cloud? I think everybody thinks it's just this quick, I just go to it, it's going to be more secure, everything's going to be easier, and I don't have to deal with the on-premises technology teams like I used to. When really cloud is just, it's a computer, it just, someone else manages it. There are lots of great opportunities by going to the cloud. I think, especially if you're a long and well-established company, things have grown up in your environment and you have no idea what it is. You have an opportunity to build fresh and build correctly going to the cloud. And what that means is you have to understand the cloud. You have to understand the security controls and protocols that need to be in place. And you can put those in place from the ground up. So you can be great from the ground up. You can also just choose to move what it is that you have that might have the little hidden broken things that you aren't aware of. And you can move that junk into the cloud and be unsecure instead of on-prem, now in the cloud. And then you can replicate it faster. So you can be much more unsecure faster if you're not thoughtful about how you go to the cloud. So yes, you can be more secure, but you have to be a lot more thoughtful and planful to move clean from the way you do things on-prem into the cloud.
And if I may build upon that, right? I mean, totally agree with what was said. I think the big concept that all of you should understand is the model in the cloud is a shared responsibility model, right? So cloud provider like Azure will provide you with certain set of securities, but you still need your own security as well to secure your applications or your data. So as long as that shared responsibility model is understood between the cloud provider and the cloud consumer, and all the best practices that, my peer over here described are adopted, I think you will end up in a much better stage of security because, people who are using cloud, they're sharing information all the time. Kelly is getting all the intelligence of Microsoft. He's putting in the Azure cloud. So from a defense standpoint, it's such a great society that's using the cloud, and all those defenses can be shared with all the consumers much better than on-prem. Imagine you having a data center, and then you are solely responsible for protecting the data center versus an institution like Amazon or Microsoft.
Great. I think it changes from a vendor relationship to a partnership, where now my customer is Ron or Manish, and we got to work together to figure out, do we want the mess for less, or do we want to actually clean it up before we get that tech debt in there, right? Yeah.
Ray, before I let you ask another question, I did have a comeback, and I think there is, like my organization, Manish's organization, large organizations have like security engineers that think about how do we go to the cloud securely. I think some of the work we're doing in partnership with, like our regulatory partners, you guys, Treasury, and then also with our cloud partners is like there's a certain level of security that, you don't have it within your organization, but it should be built in from the ground up. So when you sign up for engaging and you don't have the experts that like large organizations do, you do get a proper baseline and security that you can build upon.
So I just have one follow-up on the shared security model. Of course, as a regular, I'm also thinking about the little guy as well, and how that entity can survive, and not survive, but how can they make sure they're doing their part on the shared security model? As one of the other panels showed, they don't have a lot of leverage in terms of those organizations. How should they think about it?
Since I'm directly next to you, I'll start again.
I'm just kind of looking down the road.
I always defer to Ron.
I think one, like the cloud working group effort that we're doing in conjunction with, the PHYSIC and the FIBIC, we heard a little bit about it in the last session. I think some of the regulatory harmonization work, the cloud profile, so helping to establish what the norms should be for expectations in the cloud. I think that can be helpful for organizations that are smaller. One, for the providers and for all of the institutions, having a standard way to evaluate and know that you're actually getting good is a good thing. And then the other body of work, which is the minimum for financial services security. And if you are going to step away from that, then you have to, capture why you're doing that. Coming up with the minimum good in order to do financial services that we're all working on, I think that also will help the smaller guys.
Yeah, I think there are two different groups. There are the enterprises, kind of like Manish's and Ron's, that have extreme capability of securing their environment in any cloud provider, and maybe even a hybrid of on-prem and in cloud. I think when it comes to the SMBs, small, medium businesses, this is where I think the cloud providers must do more, because, and I would sort of summarize Jen Easterly at CISA. She'd say, look, and the new U.S. strategy around security is the cloud service providers are going to have to bear more of the burden of security risk for those SMBs. And I agree with that. The question is, how do we do that? And then if you're a regulated entity, you could be a water municipality, you could be a banking institution, you could be something else. What is our role in the regulatory process of that? And I think we're going to have to figure that out together, but we got to do that faster than slower.
Excuse me. So that brings us to the next question. There's been, as we've heard on the previous panels, there's been a lot of work around looking at cloud and what should we do about cloud. So what's on your wish list for cloud infrastructure regulation? how would you like cloud service providers to be supervised and regulated? Anybody?
Maybe I'll start this time, Ron. So one of my wish lists is, for those of you who are on your journey to the cloud, very soon you'll start to hear words like multi-cloud, poly-cloud. And my wish list is harmonization of some of the ways you can put your applications, your data, your services on those clouds. It's not always easy to migrate from one cloud to another. And if that can be made agnostic, if that can be made, hey, maybe for contingency or your highly confidential workloads are running in multiple clouds, and if that can be made easier, it's not a regulation per se, but for a consumer, and especially if a small consumer is there, it lowers the switching cost from one provider to another. For a big financial institution like us and Ron over here with Mastercard, it also allows you to have workloads in multiple clouds just in case if a cloud provider has a problem, you can jump onto the other one. But that does require some harmonization of standards, both on the security side as well as the application development side.
Yeah, I have actually, if I could think about what do we do today and what do we do tomorrow? On the previous panel, we're talking about regulatory harmonization across, I think FIS has like 120 something different regulatory bodies to deal with. That's unsustainable. So I do think that we've got to take in the U.S. privacy law. I think there are 38 different state laws. We got to harmonize those regulations so it makes it easy for not only the cloud provider, but also the banking institution to be able to better comply without an overburdened cost structure. And then I think about the future. When we're talking about AI, we're in the guts of AI right now. We're on the edge of quantum capabilities that's going to transform our markets. How do the regulators be ahead, not be 4 years behind, but be ahead of the game to give guidance for protection? Not just for regulatory, to have a voice, but to have some guidelines, some guardrails, so that we can all move in the same direction for efficiency and safety. That's what I think we got to do.
And I feel like I'm going to be a broken record because I'm going to say what everybody has already else has said is, just regulatory, the greater alignment we can have with regulations, not just in the U.S., but just internationally, because the variance is painful, and it's not necessarily securing us more. It's just us translating more between what we do versus one book versus another book. So the more we can harmonize it, the quicker we can show, how we are complying with those things that we need to comply with. And we can go very deep if we allow ourselves to, focus on a set of standards that, we can all live with. And that gives us an ability to go very deep because I don't have to do it different ways in different places. That all of that difference is humans and cycle time that is not spent securing, but just translating. So harmonization. And then I don't know that our regulatory agencies have the oversight ability over the third parties. Like they regulate financial institutions and the providers aren't financial institutions. Do they have the right authorities? Just making sure that they have the right authorities to be effective at the job that they need to do.
So I have a bit of a follow-up, having been involved in setting up international standards, maybe not in this space, but international standards in the past. So you set up principles-based, but each country will do an implementation through their own laws and things that may be called super equivalent, but can be some differences. Are there some ways in which we can kind of combat that?
Lord, I hope there is. But I just I have this flashback of having a meeting with David Koh, who's leading essentially like CISA, but in Singapore, when he said, we just rolled out a new set of cybersecurity requirements. And it's 80% of everything else that you're doing. I'm like, yes, Dave, but doing 20%, 120 different times, it actually hurts. I think we can do more. I look at some of the stuff that we're doing with the G7 Cyber Experts Group, where, it's not harmonization, it's preventing regulatory fragmentation. Like harmonization in some instances is not a good word, but so preventing fragmentation and regulations there. A lot of countries are open to it because I think their regulators see that, if you have these large globals, you're spending time not doing security, but just, translating and checking boxes. I think there has to be more dialogue at, the regulator level internationally to just keep in line. It's not an arms race where I got to try to be better than the last set of regulators. It is, how can we do this together?
I wonder if I could just sort of add a point of view. Maybe this is not politically correct, but my view on regulation is there to protect the consumers. Sometimes it's used as a political arm to either keep data in a particular jurisdiction, like a country, or it's used for another political purpose. I actually like the way GDPR formed, where it was a European thing, but the execution of the fines or whatever the problems were in country. So France could do what France wanted to do, Germany can do what Germany wanted to do, and so forth. And so I think it was clearer on an overarching, at least regional basis for how to have a regulation, principles and guidelines, but the execution of it to happen in a jurisdiction. And I think it seems like a pretty good model. Not that I love GDPR, but the model seems like the right approach to have a global and local approach. But I don't know. I mean, am I way off?
No, I think the principles based allows for that flexibility, right? And before I became the CISO, I was in investment management as the head of investment risk, market risk, counterparty risk for Vanguard, and we had to deal around with the same thing, right? U.S. regulation is very different compared to when you go to Europe with FCA, CBI, BaFin, very different principles-based regulation. But I think as long as you have your core set of controls, things you follow, and then if some of that is allowed to vary by the country, I think that's fair because every regulator is looking for something different because they're trying to protect the consumers in different ways based on previous fires, previous incidents that have happened. And when you apply all this to the cloud, I mean, clouds are global. It's not that there's a US cloud or a European cloud or, it's like, it really comes down to what consumers' data is in the cloud, where the consumer resides, and how do their jurisdictions want to protect them.
Yeah, so I think principles-wise, it does provide a good frame. I do think you beyond the security, you also get into the data protection with it, and the adversary doesn't think in states or borders, and like for us, some of what makes us effective is our ability to use data to learn from what adversaries do in one environment, and then when they try to do it in another environment, we can stop them. But in the idea of protecting the consumers in my country by the data can only be used here, what you create are these blind spots, which are, an attacker can be successful here, but we can't use the learnings or understanding of how that attack took place in this environment and leverage it to protect another environment. So we live there's goodness in a scheme that allows the same use of standards within, let a country have the ability to execute it. But sometimes we think about protection in a small sense when there's that collective defense opportunity to leverage information to prevent an adversary moving against us that we lost sight of.
Well, that's a great segue to our next question. What are the latest trends in technology in cloud security? How can organizations stay up to date stay updated, and address emerging trends. You want to start?
Sure, I'll do it. So it's a very broad question, Ray, and one of the best pieces that I find is just peer networks. So at Vanguard, we are members of FS-ISAC, which I know was mentioned in the previous panel. There is CISO committees, there is forums, there is a Cloud Security Alliance. So there's tons of stuff out there, and then there are incidents that you can learn from in the cloud as well. But there's multiple sources for you to get up to speed on what the latest trends are. Two things that we have been closely following are the zero trust architecture, right? Everyone's talking about it. You can't go to a conference or a panel and not hear about zero trust. So it goes from, how do you not get the authentication just at the network, but do it at every layer of the organization. So cloud providers have tons of great services that enable you to have the entitlements down to those granular levels to do that. So that's zero trust. The second one that I mentioned previously is the multi-cloud, polycloud. At Vanguard, we use AWS, we use Azure, and we use Google Cloud. Again, trying to diversify our business with the cloud providers, trying to put our most critical workloads maybe in multiple clouds. So that's the other trend is where when cloud started, people started going multi-region and all that stuff, trying to harden the active recovery. And now it's, okay, how do you balance one cloud provider to another and have the resiliency you need?
Look, I think there are two things the way I look at this. And you got to understand where I'm coming from. Where at Microsoft, we've got our data centers, which is the cloud. You could take the entire NFL. We have 32 teams in the NFL. You could take those stadiums. Those 32 stadiums aren't as large as our data centers. I mean, that should give you a sort of sense of scale for what is the cloud. And like our last data center is 1.5 miles long and 0.5 miles wide. I mean, it's unbelievable, thinking about this. So the trends that we're seeing is that this move to the cloud, and I think the market is around 30 or 40% there, so it's not already there yet. But the question is, what Ron asked is, how do we take things globally that we learn and help everyone else be safer before it gets there? And so that's where at Microsoft, what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sense of 65 trillion daily signals from all over the world. Learn what the attackers are doing as it's forming and get it to customers.
You said trillion?
Trillion. 65 trillion daily signals. Now, I haven't solved this problem yet. This is why I've got gray hair. So this is actually why I came to Microsoft to solve this problem. So one is to have better intelligence and get it into the hands of not just the customers like Ron and Manish, but also the FS-ISAC and others, law enforcement. The second thing is, how do I give Ron and Manish and others the tools that they know when a control is turned off, like detection, automated detection. So conditional access is one thing you mentioned, but also detection so that Ron knows when, some sysadmin turned off MFA on a server. Most of our breaches around the world are those kind of things. When it's some control is supposed to be in place, but it's not for either a human error or something, right? So we're trying to make sense of global things so we can give everybody the insights to protect against the evolving threat actor, and in their own environment, when is a control turned off so they know what to do about it? And so that's where we're trying to get to that practical side as fast as we possibly can. That's why our CEO told the administration about 3 years ago that we were going to spend $20 billion in cybersecurity over those 5 years, and we're moving super fast. So those are the trends that we're doing. How do we detect the attacker faster, and how do we inform our customers faster? That's what we're trying to do. Not to mention the AI, not to mention the quantum and all that stuff, but the practical things. That's what we're trying to solve for right now.
on the practical note, so just that's a big thing, the automation of compliance, or knowing that your controls are on, right? If you think about some of the things that trip us up, or some of the things that let the bad actor in, you might have actually had the control. You bought it, you paid for it, and at one time you actually had it on, but somewhere over the time frame, someone turned it off by accident, or they were trying to make something easy for someone, and then a bad actor found their way in. So being able to automate and understand your state of compliance at any given time, like any moment, I know that I'm compliant. There's not one company that suffered like a major breach related to cards that wasn't PCI compliant at one time. They were compliant at the moment that the auditors came in and did the audit. But then somewhere along the way, a control failed. So you can get compliance for a day if you're seeking it, but to know that you're compliant like all the time is an important thing. Like a tech group that I think about as we think about multi-cloud, or just a layer of understanding cross-cloud, is important for organizations that do the polycloud or multiple cloud thing, because each cloud provider has a really good set of security controls local to it. But then when you need to move across or have workloads that start in one area and then move into somebody else's cloud, those sets of controls aren't exactly the same. So you need like this, just a layer that can leverage each of the cloud providers' controls to give you, as someone working across many clouds, comfort that you are secure.
One last trend, if I may. Also trying to, on the cloud side, trying to protect the globe at one time. So, as I mentioned before, how do we detect something and then inform them? About a month and a half ago, we found a threat actor from China, and it affected about 700 million customers. In 24 hours, we implemented a control that automatically fixed everybody, and almost nobody knew about it. So, how do we work together, I think, in this partnership, but also how does any cloud provider, Microsoft or Google or, AWS, so that when we see something happen, we can inoculate the entire ecosystem right to the source. And that's what we got to get better at. We're not that efficient yet. And when I say we, I mean the market. We're not that efficient yet, but that is exactly where we're moving.
You all discussed multi-cloud and polycloud. Is that something that's is standard, or is that just something that's evolving?
I actually think it shouldn't be standard. When you're jumping from cloud to cloud at the same time, it's difficult. I've seen a lot of companies try to go multi-cloud right out of the gate. And what I find is when you try to go multi-cloud right out of the gate, 5 years from now, you're still like maybe a foot from the gate. I think, and it's what you got to be good at one, to learn what your requirements are and how you manage the controls. And then you go to the next, and then you have that bridging layer. And you got to have money. I think you got to have money and resources in order to manage multiple providers all at the same time. If you are small, you shouldn't be doing it. You need to be secured, but you need to be leveraging the best of where you are, and then you should be able to move to another environment and then leverage the best of what they are. But trying to manage multiples, it's not something that everybody should do, and only those that are resourced to do it should be allowed to. I think that's my personal.
It's a risk-based decision, right? Cost and risk. Because what you're doing on multi-cloud is you're hedging one cloud being unavailable so you can continue operations in your second cloud. Right, Ron?
It's resiliency, but it's also you are global in nature, and one provider can't support you where you need to be local at where this other state requires you to be local. And so you need to be able to go to the other cloud provider because you can't get that provider where you are. So you need to have a range of flexible options to fit the circumstances that you're trying to support that nation state or that country in.
Totally right. So an SMB may not want to spend the cost, and they don't have the complexity of jurisdictional cloud sovereignty that you're mentioning, right? But an SMB may say, look, out of simplicity, we're already going to get 5 nines. It's good enough. You may need 7 nines, right, in your business, because especially on your network side. So I think it's always a balance of cost and risk and complexity of that organization.
So let me ask you all been answering questions as your roles in cloud, a user of cloud, provider of cloud. I mean, flip the script. Say you're me, you're the regulator. How would you regulate cloud? Look at the wheels turn.
Maybe I know too much, but I actually think, I mean, if I'm transparent and thoughtful about this, I actually believe in regulatory guidelines. I don't believe in regulatory prescription, but I do believe in guidelines so that we protect consumers and the country. If I could rewrite the regs, I would have a requirement in there around information sharing, not as an ISAC component, but real-time, almost platform threat intel sharing. Because the idea that we have today, I've grown up with the ISACs. I used to be on the FS-ISAC. I think they're good. They're not great. And I would insert in requirements around incident sharing without penalty of regulatory impact. Now, we have some of that today, since 2015, I think, but I would be much more clear around that.
So if I like your authorities, I guess I would, as you conducted your reviews or audits, the findings, the results, the level of detail that you are working through, there are other regulators that will come across the same environments that they will walk in the same path that you just were in. And for them to be able to say, hey, look, Ray looked at this and, Ray thought these things were good. I trust Ray, and so these things should be good. So leveraging, what, spread like COVID?
COVID. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
COVID.
Oh,
sorry,
yeah,
not COVID.
Yeah, I thought he said COVID. Yeah, I don't want to spread like that. But yes, an ability to leverage each other's work. I think there's efficiency that you would get. There's efficiency. There's an opportunity to leverage some of the translation stuff that we would do to be put more into security. So I think about that. I do like the idea of sharing intelligence at machine speed, because I think we've done a lot of really good work in sharing intelligence, but it's biased, right? My intelligence team are going to pick out of the things that we have. We're going to say these things are important. What we would miss is someone that's low and slow that's attacking someone else. We would tell you what's important to us, but there could be clues that are actually important to the greater sector. But because my analysts are making a determination, you see data or intelligence from me that's Mastercard centric versus just data.
Ray, where I'm on this is, I've been thinking about this quite a lot, where cloud provider is essentially a utility, right? And you don't want to put too much regulation on a utility. You'll kill innovation. It'll probably raise the cost of a small player, medium player trying to use the cloud. I worry about that. I think at the end of the day, there could be multiple industry verticals that are using the same cloud. Could be hospitality, could be banking, could be insurance, right? Each of those verticals comes with regulation by itself on the compute infrastructure, on data retention requirements, on requirements to encrypt data in motion at rest. So multiple different things come with some regulation based on the industry you're trying to serve. So that's where I am is you don't want to be in a regulated industry and have a utility provider also regulated. It's just going to be too much.
I have more questions, but I thought this might be a good point to see if there's some questions in the audience that you'd like to ask the panel, or if we had any online. So before I add some more questions, let's see if we have any in the audience or online.
So I know we spoke about multi-cloud, poly-cloud almost being standard, but we've also seen institutions where some have done a risk assessment and have decided we're going to stick to one cloud provider. And historically, we've not seen two regions go down at the same time. So from a risk-based perspective, it does sound like a sound judgment. Wanted to get the panel's view on whether one approach is better than the other, or it depends, be it multi-cloud, poly-cloud, hybrid cloud, or single cloud.
So I think there's a lots of resiliency opportunity and localization opportunity that comes with multi-cloud, but then there's like added complexity. Your workloads have to run, and all of these different environments, and these environments, while they're a lot alike, they're not. So you have to be a little bit deeper on what it is that you build. And if you're an SME, do you have like the resources and capacity to manage across the multiple clouds? So if you're a multinational large organization with like, we have to make decisions in nanoseconds across like 4 parties for any given, I want to buy some milk in the grocery store. You got nanosecond compliance because, can you imagine if you had to wait a half hour for that decision? You would be, I think, irate. So it's got to be there. And if one cloud fails, hey, consumer, I know you were trying to get some milk, but the cloud failed, and that just isn't going to work for our customers, especially internationally. So for us, multi-cloud and like making our own on-prem cloud-like. So polycloud, just being able to deliver. Our requirements are different than a lot of SMEs and what they have to deliver on. So I think it's situational for what is your business and how there you have to be on whether or not you do multi-cloud or single cloud. But even within the single cloud, there is lots of optionality to give you greater resilience in those environments.
Wouldn't repeat what you heard, but I would say it's totally a risk-based decision. And it's an expensive decision as well. I mean, cloud security engineers and analysts are hard to find anyway. And then good luck finding cloud security engineers for Azure, then for Amazon, and then for Google. It's a very, very expensive proposition, and it comes with benefits, but I think it all comes down to, is your risk appetite larger than your outage? And are you willing to invest all those organization dollars into that strategy?
Totally agree with this. And I think we're in the evolution of cloud. So originally it would be storage, your data on somebody else's computer, right? Tomorrow, you're going to have so many things that you can't use. Think about AI for Google, for Bard, or for Security Copilot and Microsoft. It has to run on Azure. And if you are multi-cloud, because it's basically a supercomputer of tens of thousands of GPUs knitted together. So if you have your data spread on multi-clouds, you're going to take advantage of AI for only certain pieces of your data. So even if you go down this path of a risk-based decision and you say, yes, multi-cloud, you have to really be thoughtful about which data am I going to put on which cloud and why. Not for today, but for tomorrow. I'm talking about for the next decade, because of the transfer from one cloud to rip and replace from one cloud to another is extremely expensive. You can't just drag and drop it. So it really ties back into your workforce and all that other stuff. So I just think today, multi-cloud, tomorrow, I believe more people will be moving to single cloud because of the future of what they're going to be able to do.
Of course, that is also layered in on the engines you have on top of the data where it exists. We have huge AI capability. So even long before the large language models, we've invested tons and acquired AI to do the job that we need to do. So where the data exists may not matter with our AI capabilities that we employ.
That's right. It's a complicated question.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the audience or online? Okay, I have another question I can. Oh.
Hi. I do have a quick question. So Kelly earlier said that the regulators have to take a more proactive stance rather than reactive, or at least that's what you said you dreamed of. And I know that there's been a lot of talk during the conference from Vice Chair Barr and from other people about certain regulators, such as the Federal Reserve, being more of a technology company. And while we have some really intelligent people here working on some really intelligent stuff, whether that's quantum computing or AI or what have you, isn't there some element of reactivity that regulators have to have? Because we can think of something that the private sector may do, but then the private sector is going to develop something that we don't even think of. So how do we bridge that gap between our imagination and the private sector imagination and minimize it to best protect consumers and other parties?
Yeah, so three quick things. One, you're never going to be a technology company. Two, you should never just rely on whatever the private sector says. I mean, I believe in that accountability. Three, I think what it means is what Jen Easterly at CISA has been trying to push is more partnerships. How do we work together on innovations as they're emerging together so that we can, across our competitors even, like Microsoft and Google, we should get in a room and agree on what is the framework for AI before it's even GA, generally available, so that we can march towards the direction together. So I think this is where not just the key players, but a group of players need to get together with the regulator to define the future together and not just let it evolve after fires occur. That's my point of view.
One last question. Just get your quick reaction. What was your question on here?
No, just use your mic. Oh, use your mic.
Sorry. It's like you're on Teams and it's like, Ray, you're on mute. Real quick, how can organizations assess the security posture of the cloud infrastructure and applications? What are some best tips for them?
We use a third-party company that's Israel-based for posture management, constantly. To Ron's point, right? When you install it, the posture is different than a day later, a week later. So you need to be continuously monitoring it. And we fix those vulnerabilities as soon as we find out.
Yeah, it just there's a lot of things I think about within our program that Like for an application to roll, it's got to be dynamically tested by our testers. So you're developing, in order to get to a place where my pen testers do a dynamic test on it, you have to prove that you got a ticket from the code analysis that says you're free of bugs. So you have now your ticket to get dynamic tested by my team. Then we also have a bug bounty program where so my testers tested it, and then we put it in this place where security professionals from around the globe have an opportunity to test our applications using whatever test that they want to throw at it. They throw it through their tests, and when you start, they find a lot of stuff. But at where we are now, they find stuff, but it's few. And what they do find, I now need to improve my overall application testing program to look for those things. And I guess the last another program that we have is one where it's a red team. The way that we operate our red team is they are just this complete. They are an active bad organization. They have access to target. They move on their own. And then they can pick on applications, they can pick on infrastructure, but they have an understanding of who we are, what we do, and then they just attack it. There are some people that know what the attack is going to be, but they are just another adversary that we have to contend with.
Okay, I think I'll stop. I think our time is up. I want to thank Ron, Manish, and Chris for a great discussion today. And I think I'll turn it back over to Jalapa.